Okay, good evening to everyone. Uh, I, I,
Good.
before I get going, I just want to apologize that Rivka and it's not really an apology as much as an announcement, but I feel bad that for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be off. We're leaving for America uh,
Oh,
a week a week from tonight. And we have a bar mitzvah. We want to see family, and so we won't start until I have to check the date. So it's the second week in July. We come back July 5th or 6th, and then the next week we'll start again. And of course, I'll be totally confused because I'm missing a Torah reading when I fly back to Israel. So hopefully, I'll remember to do the right Torah reading for us when I get back. But I think I'll figure it out. But in any case, tonight we're going to be talking about one of the Ten Commandments. And I'm calling it one of the Ten Commandments, even though you're going to see that that's its own argument. We're very used to coming to synagogues, Bate Knesset throughout the world, and we see the Ten Commandments listed. The first one is Anochi, lo yelecha, and then the 10th one is lo tachmod. So the one we're going to talk about is lo tachmod, but it's not so simple. There are numerous different counts for what are the 10 commandments. There are a large number of authorities that don't count I am the Lord your God as one of the 10 commandments. And they say, no, that's not a mitzvah. There's no action. Mitzvot require activity. And since there's no activity, the first of the 10 commandments is to not have other gods. And so they have a totally different count than the ones we're used to seeing, above the Aron Kodesh in so many of the shuls that we grew up with. Now, this debate is based on what is the nature of mitzvot. Are mitzvot ideas, or do mitzvot have to be actions? In other words, does Judaism accept that cognitive things can be mitzvot, or do mitzvot must be behavioristic? And it's an open debate, and that debate is going to specifically refer to what we call the 10th Commandment, which I have at the top of the page, with the two versions of the way it first appears in Shmot, which is the version that we're going to read in Shul on Shavuot this Friday morning. And then afterwards, I have the second version as it appears in the review of the Torah, Mishnah Torah Devarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu repeated with changes the 10 Commandments. So let's take a look at the two right next to each other. So it begins with Lo Tachmod Beit Reyecha. Now, the translation that I have right underneath it is the JPS, and uses the most famous translation of the word Lo Tachmod, which is covet. Now, we say covet, but then we're using an English word we really don't know. So I checked a long list. There's a website called Bible Gateway that has, I think, 36 different translations of the Bible into English. Two of them are Jewish, the rest are Christian or academics. And on that list, instead of the word covet, they have the word covet there many times, but also the word desire, want, be envious, or lust. Were alternative translations for covet, which is good because we don't use the word covet very much, so we're not really used to it. So in other words, don't desire or don't be envious. I thought just by thinking of doing a mitzvah, I have to click on it. to get the whole thing. I thought just by thinking of doing a mitzvah, you get points for that before actually doing it. Yes, that's true. That's a very nice point, but that's not the mitzvah. In other words, let's use the action team. Okay, what we're going to see as we go through tonight, there are action team players and thought team players, but everybody agrees that you get divine credit just for planning to do the mitzvah, even if you don't fulfill it. But that still doesn't say that the definition of a mitzvah is or can be just a good thought. It may be that even though you get credit for the thought, the concept of a mitzvah requires an act. Even if you didn't, in this case, do it, Hashem gives you, A for effort, check, even though you didn't actually perform the act, which is the mitzvah. So you're right in your point, but it doesn't really answer the question in the debate, because it still could be that the actual mitzvah requires you to do something. Okay? So anyway, so first says, don't be envious, lust after the house of your neighbor. Lo tachmod eshet reyecha, and how much more so not that your neighbor's neighbor's wife, avdo, servant, amato, maid servant, male and female servants, shoro, ox, chamoro, donkey, and everything that belongs to him. So that's list number one. In Devarim, the list is very similar, but there's a change of order. Instead of talking about the house of your neighbor, it instead says, first, the wife of your neighbor. And now another change. It switches from lo tachmod to lo titaveh. And we're going to see in about 15 minutes, we're going to see what is the difference between the word lo tachmod and lo titaveh. I'm going to translate it now as lo tachmod is desire, want, be envious, lust. And I'm going to say lo titaveh is don't be jealous of. So jealousy sounds like more of a cognitive idea rather than an action. But we're going to see more about that in just a few minutes. So don't be jealous of the house of your neighbor, his field, which didn't appear in the first one, avdo and amato, again, male and female servants, shoro, ox, then chamoro, donkey, and everything. So the second list is a little bit more detailed, adds a couple of things, and changes a little bit the actions. The question is, what's the difference? We're going to see and approach a little bit later to what the difference is. But right now, we just want to talk about what is this obligation of, or what is this mitzvah of not coveting. And the Ibn Ezra is the first one we're going to take a look at. And he begins by saying, wow, people just don't get this mitzvah. People are amazed at this commandment. It doesn't seem to be like any other commandment. They ask, how is it possible for a person not to covet? In other words, not coveting is like saying to people, don't eat, don't drink. There are things that come very naturally to human beings. And the Torah, generally speaking, doesn't prohibit us from doing those activities which come to us naturally. Okay, so that's how he begins. Okay. Now, here's his answer to that little bit of a problem. Now, just as a man, a person, okay, he's going to say mother, but it could be the same way with a young woman and a father. But okay, we're doing it the way he said it, though. Now, just as a man does not desire to sleep with his mother, although she be beautiful, because he has been trained from his childhood to know that she is prohibited to him. It's interesting. It's not just true of mothers, it's true of siblings. And we know that if siblings grow up together, then the possibility of incest is much lower than if perhaps statistically, if the sister grew up in another home and only later they meet, then the prohibition doesn't seem to be as insurmountable as would be in a normal family setting. Okay. So must every intelligent person know that a person does not acquire a beautiful woman or money because of his intelligence or wisdom, but only in accordance with what God has apportioned to him. I should be satisfied with what I have, seems to be the first thing that we're being told. So this mitzvah is sort of like, it's not talking about an activity, it's sort of training us to think in a certain economic or sociological way. It's not so much telling us how to behave, it's telling us how to think. And it's like teaching us a new way of thinking about society, and perhaps even about business and economics, that we should learn not to want things that Hashem hasn't sent our way. It's an interesting idea, but I don't think it works in society. I think it's important that people want to have more. That's what motivates a lot of things in business. Okay. He will therefore be happy with his lot and will not allow his heart to covet and desire anything which is not his. It's an interesting idea, but I don't think, and we're going to see a lot of other authorities don't agree with this position, but he's saying that this mitzvah is trying to teach us to just be sameach b'chelko, be happy with one's lot. And we're going to talk more about that idea as we go along, but it's an interesting way to start. For he knows that which God did not want to give him, he cannot acquire it by his own strength, thoughts, or schemes. If God didn't give it to you, you're never going to get it. I don't know. I don't know about that. I think that people can be born in poor circumstances and pull themselves up by the bootstraps and find themselves acquiring a lot of things. Now, he might say, oh, God wanted it to be that way, but it didn't feel like that to the person who was working very hard to succeed in business. So at Ibn Ezra's positions, I think not on very firm psychological or philosophic basis. The word chamad has two meanings in Hebrew. One is to rob or to extort, and it comes out that way, as we see in a pasuk here from Exodus, from Shemot, that it can mean to rob someone of their property. Okay. The second meaning is to desire in the heart without acting. So there are two different ideas in this mitzvah. One of them is don't desire things which aren't yours. Control your emotions. That's the mitzvah. But there's another part of it. Don't act on those thoughts. And we're going to see that idea is very popular, especially with the Rambam, in just a few minutes. So the Ibn Ezra, interestingly enough, concludes, now neither shall thou covet thy neighbor's house is the 9th statement. And thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife is the 10th. He says, he doesn't count the Lord your God as one of the 10 commandments. He's saying this commandment is 2. It's 2 of the 10 commandments are in this one. One of them is don't think about taking other people's things. And the other is don't get up and do it. It's a fascinating approach. And he separates it into the more, into the humans that you might want to take into your family and the property that you might take into your stock portfolio. He separates the two and says, this is 2 of the 10 commandments. Now, this is a unique position. I don't know anyone else who says this idea that the Ibn Ezra is saying, but we can see before we get into other interpretations, this is not an easy mitzvah to understand. And the rabbis really struggled with it. Having said that, let's take a look at a couple of other early positions. The Chizkuni, who wrote in Europe a little bit later than the Ibn Ezra, but not much, and he said, no, I don't agree. This mitzvah, this prohibition, this avera means you got to do something. And so he says, do not scheme. Tachmod isn't about desire and want. It's about nefarious behavior. It's scheming, okay? It's plotting to take other people's things. It's do not scheme to bring about her divorce so that she can marry her, so that you can marry her. The translation, lo tamol, cannot be that you shall not kidnap her, otherwise force her to sleep with you. That prohibition was already in the prohibition of adultery. Okay, so it doesn't mean to, God forbid, we're not talking about rape or anything like that. We're talking about don't carry out schemes and plots to destroy the household of your neighbor, by going over there to, your wife was doing this and your wife was doing that. In other words, don't use plots and schemes to destroy that household. And the same thing might be true, by the way, of their car. Oh, I really want their car. So you go over and say, I'm hearing your car making funny noises. So it's everything that the person owns. He says the prohibition isn't just thinking about it, desiring it, lusting after it. It's really doing something to bring about the change of venue for those other items. So again, it's not just about thought, cognition, it's about behavior. And according to the Chizkuni, and most of the authorities actually, as we're going to see as we go along, they're more concerned that mitzvot should be behavioral rather than just cognitive. Okay? And now we're going to skip to Rabbi Nachman, who's going to go back and be closer to the Ibn Ezra. And we're going to do a lot of back and forth before we get to what I think is the right interpretation, which is going to take us a while to get to. Okay, Rabbi Nachman, of course, Rabbi Nachman died in 1809, so he's much later than Ibn Ezra and the Chizkuni, who lived in the 13th and 14th centuries. This is the grievous prohibition, the worst of the averas, included in the Ten Commandments. Do not covet. Coveting itself is strictly forbidden. Just wanting other people's stuff is asur. This is because by coveting, one can rob another's money as well as the souls. I'm not sure what he means by nishamot. He says he can steal the souls, the livelihood, the household of the sons and the daughters. Is therefore forbidden to misappropriate a deposited item, even in thought. This is one of those very few averot that can be accomplished according to Rabbi Nachman, not according to the Chizkuni. So the Ibn Ezra and Rabbi Nachman said, this is a thought crime. And just thinking these bad ideas of misappropriating other people's property and wanting it, desiring it, in and of itself is asur. As we learned about Mitzvah, a person who intends to misappropriate a depositive item. But that's not the Araita, that's the Rabbanan. I think he's going beyond. But we're seeing clearly that there are forming two teams, and that's going to be true through the next two commentaries that we take a look at. That they're formed up during the time of our commentaries throughout the ages, two different opinions about how to deal with this this particular type of avera. Remember, we're not just talking about don't covet. It can be extended to other areas as well. But let's try to fit this mitzvah into a rubric, into a setup where we can compare it to other mitzvot. And that's what Rabbi Tarragon does. Okay, Rabbi Taragin quotes from two sources. The first one is the Smak. The Smak, again, lived in the 13th century. In southern France, where he lived, actually today is in Switzerland, into 7 categories. There are 613 mitzvot, and I can see 7 different types of mitzvot. Where does he get the number 7? Corresponding to the days of creation. The mitzvot of the first day of creation, refer to mitzvot of the heart. He cites lo tachmod as focused upon the emotions and thoughts in the heart. So he is agreeing with the Ibn Ezra and Rabbi Nachman that lo tachmod is a non-active mitzvah prohibition. And there are a bunch of such mitzvot, and those mitzvot have to do with the day in which God intended to create the world. God's intentions show that intentions can be important enough to be mitzvot or avera. Okay. Similarly, the Ramban Nachmanides maintains that each of the Aseret Dibrot is alluded to in the mitzvot which opens Parshat Kedoshim. The beginning of Parshat Kedoshim is it's Kedoshim to you, you should be holy. But then it says keep Shabbos. It says respect your parents. But it doesn't say don't covet. So which of those mitzvot at the beginning of chapter 19 in Sefer Vayikra corresponds to our prohibition of wanting other people's stuff? And the answer I found a little surprising. And his answer is the parallel to lo tachmod is the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your fellow person, human being, Jew, according to most commentaries, although some commentaries means every human being. You should love your fellow as you love yourself. This symmetry appears to formulate our mitzvah as governing our emotions. Just like I'm supposed to have these positive vibrations, positive vibes for other people, wanting good stuff for them, so it is equally asur for me to have negative feelings about my neighbors and my fellows, my colleagues, and other people I come into contact with. And so those two, one is giving the positive side of the coin, the other is giving the negative side of the coin, but they correspond. Just like I shouldn't want to take away my neighbor's stuff, I should equally want to make sure that my neighbor has everything that he needs to survive, because I love him like I love myself. However, this is debated by the Rambam, Maimonides, who's a philosopher but disagrees in this case. He said the mitzvah has to have an action. This is debated by the Rambam and that famous commentary, the Ra'avad, or Avram ben David, who comments on the Rambam. The latter, the Ravid, the Avram ben David, claims that it applies only when the victim remains opposed to the sale. In other words, let's say I go over to my neighbor. He's got a car I really like. So I go over to him and say, I'll give you $1,000 for the car. Now that's okay. It's okay to make an offer for the car. But once, according to the Ravid, once the other person says no, then you have to stop. Once the person says, I'm not interested in selling this item, then and only then do you start to get into the category of the avera of lo tachmod, of do not covet other people's stuff. In contrast, the Rambam rules regardless of the compliance of the seller, the pursuer has violated lo tachmod. Once he says he's against it, the Ravid said, then you've done lo tachmod. In the case of the Rambam, You can do lo tachmod even if he doesn't continue. You just raise the ante. You said $1,000. He said no. So you go up to $10,000. He says yes. That was still lo tachmod because you sort of pushed him into it. The Ravid, by emphasizing the role of the actual seizure, was grouping lo tachmod together with gezela, with stealing things. The Rambam, even though you have to actually do an act, make the offer and be refused, he's saying that it's still close, it's still separate from actually acquiring the object. It's still closer to thought, even though there was an action. So we've got the Ravid and the Rambam said action. We've got the Smak and the Ramban and Rabbi Nachman and the Ibn Ezra says, no. All you have to do is think it, and you have broken the law. Rav Meidan. Rav Meidan is the Rosh Yeshiva, one of the three Rosh Yeshivas of Yeshivat Har Etzion in Alon Shvut, in Gush Etzion, south of me. I'm pointing to the south. Excuse me. And he is, unlike most Rosh Yeshivas, he really has a very deep interest in Tanakh. Once someone becomes a Rosh Yeshiva, mostly you have them writing about Talmud, Gemara, or Halacha, Psak Halacha, Shulchan Aruch. But he, even though he's a Rosh Yeshiva of a prominent and respected institution, still spends a lot of his time studying Tanakh. And I happen to think that that's beautiful, and I think it's good for the students to see that a Rosh Yeshiva isn't just a Gemara Rebbe or a Halacha Rebbe. He's also a Tanakh Rebbe. So Rav Meidan asks the same question we've been discussing, since we began half an hour ago. What is this coveting that is forbidden? The halachic sources part ways here with the commentators who tend towards pshat. He, unlike what we've seen so far, he decided that there's two teams. There's the team that believes that lo tachmod can be cognitive, can be a thought crime. Those tend to be commentaries on Tanakh. The other team who basically say, nah, you haven't transgressed this until you've done something. You've made an offer. You've, behaved obnoxiously towards your neighbor, bugging him until he sells you what you want from him. And that group tend to be people that are less famous for being commentaries and more famous for being halachists, which is fascinating. And I'm glad I looked at this because I wouldn't have noticed it on my own. His point is very clear that the people who tend to focus on what does the verse say tend to believe that it's perfectly legitimate to say that an avera, a mitzvah, can be involved with thought. But there's another group of great rabbis who spend most of their time trying to decide what's the halacha. Is this kosher? Is this something you can do on Shabbat? And they spend most of their time in the halachic realm. For them, no, what are you talking about? It can't be that an avera or a mitzvah is just something going on in your head. No, mitzvot have to involve the body, actions. You've got to do something. So he noticed, I feel bad I didn't notice it, that you can take the rabbis out there and you can predict how they're going to describe this mitzvah based on the corpus of their previous intellectual material. So the Rambam and the Ravid, they basically are halachists. they basically are famous for their halachic work. So of course they say there's got to be an action. As opposed to the Ramban, even though he did write halachic material, but he's most famous for his commentary on Chumash, and the Ibn Ezra is most famous for his commentaries on Tanakh. So these people tend to say, "Oh, yeah, sure, you can have a thought crime." I'm really glad I saw this comment by Rav Meidan, because I think it really helps us understand which rabbis take which positions. Okay. Rabbeinu Bechaye, who is a student of the Ramban, and again, more of a commentary, but he says, Rabbeinu Bechaye maintains that the prohibition concerns one's inner feeling. Again, it's a thought crime, okay? Eschewing desire for things belonging to others. I really shouldn't want things that don't belong to me, okay? I have to make a point, and I didn't put him on the page. There is a nice comment on this by Rabbi Asher Meyer, who is, again, more of a halachic authority. He writes about halachic issues in the modern world. He makes a very important point. Maybe, if I remember, I'll send it out. I'll send out that article if you want to take a look at it, or at least a quote from it on the WhatsApp tomorrow. And he says that this does not include commercial things like stores. Once someone has said, I am willing to sell this, by putting in a store window or putting up a sign for sale, then the Avera of Lo Tachmod can never apply to it. So we just, there are things that are meant to be bought and desired by others. So we don't prohibit advertising and things like that, although I wish we could prohibit some of the actual advertisements that we see. Some of them drive me crazy, but okay, but forgetting about that. But the concept of telling people, I'm selling this, I am willing to take offers for this, that is permitted, definitely 100%. We're talking about private property where no effort has been made to let people know that it is for sale. Then again, I've grown up with people who say everything's for sale. Yeah. And when you have that attitude that everything's for sale, I think that you can find yourself transgressing this avera. But okay. According to these interpretations, the same message conveyed by the command lo titaveh. If that's true, when in the Devarim they say lo tachmod and lo titaveh, don't covet and don't desire, it's sort of the same thing. However, there is a difference between coveting and desiring. They are different words. And again, most strict commentaries on Tanakh really believe that Chumash, Nach don't have synonyms. That if there's a different word, there's a different meaning. And so now Rav Meidan is going to describe what's the difference between ta'ava, which we usually translate as a desire or an appetite, as opposed to lo tachmod, which is more of covet, be jealous of, okay? Desire arises. Desires come from physical sources, usually for bodily needs, and it seeks immediate gratification. When you say you have a taiva for something, that's an appetite. That can be, food and drink and things of that nature that you have a real need for. This includes, certain attractions between husband and wife as well. That word ta'ava is used for that as well. But these are built into who we are biologically. It's sort of ta'avot tend to come from the animal side of who we are, as opposed to coveting, lo tachmod, seeks to fulfill a need which makes logical sense. I've thought about it. It's not that my body needs it. I've thought about it, okay? That involves a longer time frame. I would really like to have a car like that. As opposed to, gee, I really need some food or some drink, okay? So one is more physical, biological appetites, while the other is more cognitive, philosophic wants that are more intellectually developed. For this reason, coveting may lead a person into convoluted legal reasoning. In other words, I can try to figure out why that guy's farm really belongs to me and not to him, and I can go to court and figure out how I can repossess it from him. It involves a more complex thought system. Here, the Torah demands that a person control his desires, those kinds of desires, and banish them from his thoughts, not try to come up with all these plots and machinations to get things that belong to my neighbor that aren't things that I need to live, but are things that I believe would make my life better if I had them. According to the halachic view of the commandment, you shall not covet, concerns not the act of taking or acting for the purpose of taking the coveted object. Thus, we have two prohibitions. One comes to teach a person to guide his thoughts in a good and proper direction, while the other comes to protect the neighbor from damage that might be caused to him via seemingly legitimate processes. A new idea. The fact that the Torah at one point in Devarim says, don't titaveh, don't desire, that's really worried about me. Don't be that kind of person who's jealous of what other people have. Try to control yourself. Try to find a way to be satisfied with what you have. That's that. That's one prohibition. The other prohibition, don't tachmod, that means don't bother my neighbor because I want what they have. One is trying to make me a better person. The other one is trying to prevent me from being a nudge and a pain in the neck for the people in my neighborhood. So that's the way Rav Meidan has separated. It's not exactly what the Ibn Ezra said when he said that these are two separate commandments in the Ten Commandments, okay? But there's a similarity. One has to do with me being a better person. The other has to do with me not being a pain in the neck for the people around me. Both of them are important, and we should be working on both of these fronts. Okay, so, we've been dancing around a very important issue that I just want to spend a couple of minutes discussing head on, and that is the Torah more concerned with the way we think, or is the Torah more concerned with the way we behave? Which is primary? And that debate took place in the Gemara. And here is the famous debate. Rabbi Tarfon and the elders, this Canim, were reclining. Reclining was they didn't have regular chairs like we have. They're more like divans or like small sofas, okay, in the loft. That's like the attic of the house of Nitza in Lod. Lod was very close to where the modern city of Lod is now, probably a little further north, okay? When the question was asked of them, is study greater or is action greater? I would love to have been there just to see how the discussion came around to that thing. I don't know what they were originally discussing, but apparently the students wanted to know from these great rabbis, which is more important, Is it study or is it action? Again, cognitive, behavioristic, which is more important? Remember, these are rabbis, right? So what do they say? Rabbi Tarfon answers, action is greater. Okay. Rabbi Akiva answered, study is greater. A debate. We're talking about behavior, cognition, which is more important. And then everybody finally concluded study is greater. But only when that study leads to action. The most important thing that Jews should be doing is thinking about what is the right course of action. But just coming up with that idea is only worthwhile if it actually develops into that action. It's not enough to have the right idea. It's only good to have the right idea if it moves you to behave in the right way. Yes, we Jews are primarily, people of the book, people of the thought. We are basically scholars. That's throughout the ages. However, the scholarship is directed towards improving our behavior. And that's going to be true in our mitzvah too. Whether you take the side, you've done the sin just with the thought, or you take the side, no, it's not a sin until the thought has been carried into some activity. Either one would still agree you really have to think about the issue and think about the issue in such a way that it brings you to proper behavior. At what point did you commit this sin? Okay, that's a separate debate. But both of them agree that the thought is important because of where it leads. Okay. Rabbi Shai Held, who's an interesting fellow, he's known for being a little bit of a liberal thinker, and was actually a student of mine many years ago. And he said, despite its obvious benefit for building moral character, is there an aspect of this prohibition on coveting that unfairly preserves the socioeconomic status quo? Is there a sociological problem with this particular mitzvah that was this mitzvah imposed by the rich people on the poor people so that they wouldn't rebel against them? Is that what's going on in this mitzvah? Which would make it really not a very nice thing, because we do want people to desire that they, progress economically. We do want people to better themselves, both intellectually and economically. We are in favor of that. But maybe if we say don't covet what other people have, it was just a way of the rich people trying to keep the poor people down. Is that a possibility? Might it be used to keep the oppressed and downtrodden from demanding what they need and what is theirs by right? Is this a way to keep, the poor people poor and the rich people rich? No, it's not. And Rabbi Held, and I should have put some examples on the page, but I was running out of space because there was a lot of stuff I wanted to put on the page tonight. He brings a few examples in Tanakh when, I hadn't thought of this, and I thank him for bringing this up, when it's clear that most of the people in Tanakh who commit the sin of lo tachmod were already wealthy. The people that break this law aren't the poor people. It's the rich people. It's the rich people that go around wanting more. The most famous case is the case of King Ahav, where he wants a neighbor's field, and his wife Jezebel arranges for that person to be killed so that the king can confiscate the vineyard. The people, and there are other examples, but the examples of people who tend to be over lo tachmod tend not to be poor people. They tend to be rich people who just want more. The poor people do want to better themselves, but they don't want to better themselves at the expense of others. It's the rich people who think I have a right to everything, even what my neighbor owns. It's a fascinating idea. I don't know if it's true in a statistical way throughout history, but in the stories presented in Tanakh of people that covet, they tend to be wealthy, rich, powerful people. I gave what I think is the best example, but didn't David HaMelech do it too? When he wanted Bathsheba and ended up conniving to get her from her husband. And he also was rich and powerful. Most of the people, and he does tshuva. He recognized that he did an avera, and he does tshuva. And the avera that he did was not adultery, because the husband had divorced her before he went to war. There was a blanket divorce. The avera that he committed was ours, lo tachmod. Don't want the wife of your neighbor. It's fascinating that the true examples that we have in Tanakh of people that break this avera transgress this avera are indeed the wealthy, not the poor. But it's a great question. I'm glad that Rabbi Held brought it up. Rabbi Heschel, and I have to now speed up a little bit. Rabbi Heschel brings up a great idea. Before I get to the point I really want to make, and I didn't leave myself enough time for it, Rabbi Heschel makes a great point. And he always, I should say always, he often does. Rabbi Heschel, this is, by the way, in his Sefer on Shabbat. When Shabbat, you're not supposed to think about possessions. He brings up, nothing is as hard to suppress as the will to be a slave to one's own pettiness. The greatest slavery is slavery to our own desires, right? Gallantly, ceaselessly, quietly, man must fight for inner liberty. Inner liberty depends upon being exempt from the domination of things. This mitzvah is here to teach me not to allow the want of stuff, wealth, riches, material gain to dominate my life. That's what its core value is really teaching us. There are many who have acquired a high degree of political and social liberty, but only very few are not enslaved to things. A lot of people define themselves by the stuff they own, and that's very sad. That's very sad. And this mitzvah on the philosophic plane is trying to teach us, don't do that. Define yourself by your thoughts, your actions, your behavior, not by the things you own, not by your stuff. We used to joke, men are judged by, who has the most toys. And it's a sad commentary on more in Chutz La'aretz, especially the United States, I think, than here. But a lot of people define themselves, especially in the States, by their possessions, and that's very sad. And Lo Tachmod is teaching us not to do that. But what is Lo Tachmod teaching me to do? Until now, we've been emphasizing what Lo Tachmod is teaching me not to do. But at the end, the Ramban, first we're going to see the Rabbeinu Bachai, then we're going to see the Ramban, is teaching us it also has a critically important idea for what we should do. And that is, still there are occasions when coveting is a character trait which is permitted. We believe that if God endowed us with a certain trait, there's got to be a positive purpose for it. Anger is necessary sometimes, right? Hatred can also sometimes be appropriate when this person is doing terrible things to the Jewish nation. We're supposed to hate Amalek, Haman, Hitler, right? So if there is an emotion, there must be a purpose for it somewhere where I should be expressing it, okay? So coveting the opportunity to perform certain commandments of the Torah is not only permissible, but praiseworthy. This is what our sages had in mind when they said, Kinat sofrim tarbe chachma. The envy displayed by scholars of the knowledge of other scholars who are their superiors leads to an all-around increase in wisdom. I should feel bad that somebody learns better than me, and I should try to improve my learning to be more like him. And same thing with davening. I should feel bad when I look at Mr. Schwartz or Mrs. Cohen davening and say, oh man, I have to daven like that too. And that's okay. So in other words, it is okay to have kin'ah, a certain amount of jealousy for spiritual attainments, because hopefully those will motivate me to greater spiritual heights. And then the Ramban says what I think is the most important idea about this 10th of the 10 Commandments. And it's hidden away toward the end of a long, not so interesting essay on the 613 mitzvot as derived from the 10 Commandments. It's mostly a list, but there are a couple of places where he says something very, very poignant. And here's one of them. And he says, Hi bichlal lo tachmod eshet reyecha. What can we learn from the cloud, from the general concept of don't covet your neighbor's wife? What can I learn from that? Oh, aval ishto yachmod. I should covet my wife. I should love and appreciate the things I do own, starting with my wife, then going to my field, and then my children, and or whatever, That when we say, you know what, don't covet other things. And so there's a principle, milav atashamea hein. From the negative, you're supposed to posit the positive. You're supposed to intuit the other side of it. We are supposed to love our spouse. We're supposed to really covet them, desire them, make them a focus in our lives. We're supposed to love our families and our homes. And that's what we should take away from lo tachmod. Not just be careful about how the negative use of this can destroy me, my neighbor, and whole communities, but remember that there's a positive side. We're supposed to love things, and those things are the things which are ours and are connected to me. Ezehu asher, who is the true wealthy person? Hasamech bechelko. It's the person who enjoys the things that the person has. That's what we should be striving for. So when you get to lo tachmod, be careful. Don't have negative thoughts about the next door neighbors. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses. That's not an important principle in Judaism. But on the other hand, from this, I'm supposed to intuit, appreciate, and love the things I have. And that starts with spouse, house, children. Those are the things that are in the list here that I'm supposed to really have a zikah, a connection to in my life. And sometimes we make a mistake because we spend so much effort concentrating on what is the problem that we sometimes miss that beautiful kernel in the middle, that nugget waiting for us to discover it, which is What should this do to make my life better? Where should this lead me in a positive way? And that's what Torah really wants. Yes, Torah does want to prevent me from doing bad stuff. But more than that, Torah wants to move me towards doing wonderful, beautiful things. And I just love this interpretation from the Ramban. I also love my wife, but it's very important that we see from this negative, we can turn it around and see a great, great positive, which is we have so much that are in our families and our homes and our lives that are worthy of appreciation. And when we truly appreciate what we have, we're not going to want what the other guy has. We're going to be just sameach b'chalkenu. We're just going to be happy with what we indeed have. And on that note, I want to wish all of you a very happy Chag. Chag Sameach. You should have a wonderful and meaningful Shavuot. Whether you stay up all night and learn is not as so important as much as that you do connect again to Torah and mitzvot on this anniversary of first getting the Torah at Sinai. So have a wonderful Chag and have a wonderful first half of the summer. I'll miss you guys. I'll try to send you, while I'm away, I'll try to continue writing articles. Believe that, or I'll put them on the WhatsApp. And,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a safe trip.
Thank
Enjoy.
you.
Okay. Have a great Chag. Bye-bye.